My name is James Rohn, and today I'm telling you about a woman left for dead on a train station bench, until a stranger did something the whole town was too ashamed to do. Evelyn Harper had not moved from that station bench in 3 days, and by the third morning, the town of Caldwell Creek had stopped pretending not to notice her. She had arrived with a trunk full of hope and a heart full of promises written in careful, warm handwriting by a man named Thomas Reed, a rancher she had never once laid eyes on but had come to trust through 8 months of letters that arrived like clockwork every 3 weeks. He had told her Montana needed a woman like her, patient, intelligent, unafraid of hard work. He had told her to come west, that he would meet her at the station the first Tuesday of July, and that together they would begin a proper life. She believed him enough to give up her classroom of 31 students in Harrove County, Virginia, enough to pack away the only life she had built for herself since her parents passed, enough to sew a traveling dress in the exact shade of blue he said suited her best. But the first Tuesday of July came and went, and so did the second, and now she sat with nothing but a single dime pressed into her palm so tightly it left a mark on her skin. She had eaten almost nothing in 3 days, surviving on a piece of bread offered by a passing child who did not yet know how to withhold kindness the way adults had learned to. She watched 7 trains come and go, 7 chances for Thomas Reed to finally appear, and 7 disappointments that settled deeper into her chest each time. The station master had stopped meeting her eyes. The merchants whispered about her when they thought she could not hear, calling her the woman nobody was coming for, offering shame but never water, pity but never a kind word spoken directly to her face. She thought of Virginia, of whether the widow who once rented her a room would take her back, of whether the school board would see her as anything more than a cautionary tale, the foolish spinster who chased a stranger's letter all the way to Montana and returned with nothing to show for it. She had already done her crying, alone in the dark of the waiting room on that first terrible night, and she promised herself she was finished with tears. Now she simply sat, watching a hawk circle patient and certain above the station roof, envying not its freedom but its clarity, its absolute knowledge of exactly what it was searching for. She turned the dime over in her fingers again and again, calculating what little time she had left before the last of her resources ran out completely, before she would have no choice but to decide what came next with no money, no shelter, and no one in the entire territory who knew her name. The wood of the bench had worn smooth beneath her from 3 days of sitting, and the blue dress she had sewn by candlelight back home had gone gray with dust, much like the hope she had carried west with her. She was a woman erased slowly by disappointment, sitting in plain sight of an entire town that watched her fade and did nothing, until the sound of a single horse, unhurried and steady, began moving up the road beside the station platform. The stranger who dismounted that horse did not ask Evelyn the question everyone else had asked for 3 days straight. He did not ask if she was waiting for someone, and he did not offer the same hollow sympathy she had grown sick of hearing. Instead, James Walker simply looked at her, really looked at her, the way no one in Caldwell Creek had bothered to in 72 hours, and asked how long she had been sitting there. When she told him 3 days, he did not flinch or soften his voice the way men often did around a woman they assumed might break. He simply nodded, as though confirming something he had already suspected the moment he rode past. He asked whether the person she was waiting for had come, and when she said no, he offered no comfort, no false hope, only the plain truth that she had been waiting for someone who chose not to show up. It was not cruelty, and it was not pity, it was simply honesty delivered without flourish, and somehow that honesty cut deeper than any unkind word could have because there was nothing to argue against, nothing to defend herself from. He introduced himself simply, a rancher from north of town, half a day's ride away, offering to take her off that bench and into the shade before the July heat did any more damage. When she pointed out that she did not know him at all, he agreed plainly that she did not, and said he was not offering a ride to a woman he knew, he was offering it to a woman who had been sitting in the sun for 3 days straight and needed to be somewhere else. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that his ranch hand's wife cooked on Tuesday nights, and that if she came with him, she would finally get a proper meal. Evelyn was no fool, she understood exactly what it meant for a woman alone to accept a ride from a stranger, understood every risk the world attached to a decision like that, understood what the town was already whispering about her reputation. But she also understood she had one dime, a trunk she could not carry on her own, and absolutely nowhere else to go. When she asked him directly why he was doing this, his answer was not romantic, and it was not heroic in the way stories usually demanded. He simply said that nobody ought to be left sitting on a bench until they disappeared completely, and something about the plainness of that answer, the lack of performance in it, was what finally convinced her. It was not hope that made her stand from that bench, and it was not desperation either, it was the simple, overwhelming relief of being seen as a person worth rescuing by someone who expected nothing in return, someone who found her situation unacceptable in the most basic human terms and decided to do something about it without ceremony. The ride north out of Caldwell Creek stretched across dry, dust-white roads beneath a Montana sky that pressed down with the full weight of summer, and for the first mile Evelyn sat behind James with her hands braced carefully on her own knees, refusing to hold on to him, as though holding on was a kind of surrender she was not yet ready to offer a stranger. He told her plainly that she could hold on if she needed to, that it was a long road ahead, and though she insisted she was fine, by the second mile she found herself resting her hands lightly against his sides, and he said nothing about it, allowing the silence between them to simply exist without comment. As they rode, the scrubby flatlands around the station gave way slowly to something larger and more alive, grass rolling in long unhurried waves under the wind, distant hills rising into view that had been completely invisible from where she had spent 3 days trapped in her own disappointment, and for the first time in weeks Evelyn felt she could breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs. She asked him careful, testing questions, how long he had owned the ranch, where he had lived before settling there, and when his answers grew short around the edges of his past, she recognized the boundary for what it was and did not push against it. He told her about his 2 workers, Hector who ran the cattle alongside him, and Hector's wife Clara who kept the house, admitting with surprising honesty that the house itself needed far more keeping than he was capable of giving it, that there were dishes left in places they had no business being and windows that had not been opened since February. She found herself almost smiling at his bluntness, a small unfamiliar movement in muscles she had forgotten how to use over the last difficult weeks. When they crossed a shallow creek, the cold water splashing against her ankles through her boots, James asked her gently about Thomas Reed, the man who never came, and though she considered staying silent, she told him the truth plainly, that they had corresponded for 8 months, that his letters had been detailed and beautifully written, describing the land and the seasons and everything he claimed to want in a wife, and that she had simply believed him. James did not offer the judgment she had braced herself for, did not tell her she should have known better the way everyone else seemed eager to, and when she told him she simply needed to say the truth out loud to someone who would not shame her for it, he told her plainly that he was not most people. There was no boast in the way he said it, only quiet fact, and somehow that made it land as more true than any grand promise ever could. An hour later, his ranch finally came into view, low wooden building standing solid and unadorned against the endless sky, built not to impress anyone passing by but simply to endure, and Evelyn understood, watching it grow closer, that she had just crossed into the beginning of something entirely different from the life she had planned, one built not on beautiful letters and distant promises, but on plain truth spoken directly to her face. If this story moved you the way it moved me, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and stay close, because Evelyn and James's story is only just beginning.